I never thought I'd end up in a place like Sunset Pines. The sterile hallways with their two bright fluorescent lights, the constant smell of antiseptic barely masking something more medicinal beneath, the rhythmic beeping of machines down the hall. None of it felt like home. But here I was, 68 years old, sitting on the edge of a bed that wasn't mine, in a room that wasn't mine, wondering how I'd let my children talk me into this. "It's for the best, Mom," my daughter Vanessa had said, her perfectly manicured hand resting on mine. "You know we worry about you in that big house all alone. What if you fell? What if there was an emergency? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." My son Derek had nodded in agreement, arms crossed over his chest. Statistically, most accidents involving seniors happen in their own homes. This place has 24-hour care. It's the responsible choice. The responsible choice. As if I hadn't been making responsible choices my entire life. As if raising them single-handedly after their father walked out wasn't responsible. As if working 2 jobs to put them through college wasn't responsible. As if carefully maintaining the 4-bedroom Victorian home their father and I had purchased in our 20s, the one they'd grown up in, wasn't responsible. I stared at the generic watercolor painting hanging on the wall of my new suite at Sunset Pines Assisted Living. A pale imitation of a sunset over an ocean I'd never seen. I'd never even been to the ocean, despite dreaming about it for years. Always too busy, always too responsible. With a sigh, I opened the small closet where Vanessa had hung a fraction of my clothes. She'd insisted I couldn't bring everything. "There just isn't enough space, Mom. We'll keep the rest safe for you." The rest of my life, packed away in boxes, stored in my own basement as if I were already dead. "Mrs. Eleanor Harris?" A gentle knock accompanied the voice. A young woman in scrubs stood at my door, clipboard in hand. "I'm Cynthia, one of the care managers here. I just wanted to check in, see how you're settling in." Her smile seemed genuine, but it didn't reach her tired eyes. "I'm fine," I said automatically, the response I'd perfected over the years whenever anyone asked how I was doing. Fine when my husband left me for his secretary. Fine when I had to sell my jewelry to pay for Vanessa's braces. Fine when Derek's college tuition meant I couldn't fix the leaking roof for another year. Always fine. "That's good to hear," Cynthia replied, clearly not believing me but professional enough not to push. "We have group activities in the common room at 4 if you'd like to join. It's a good way to meet your neighbors." I nodded, though I had no intention of joining. Socializing with strangers had never been my strong suit, and I doubted that was going to change now that I'd been exiled to this place that smelled of bleach and decay. After Cynthia left, I pulled out the small leather-bound album I'd smuggled, in my purse. Vanessa had tried to curate my belongings, but this was one thing I refused to part with. I flipped through the pages, tracing my fingers over photographs of a younger me standing proudly in front of my house the day we bought it in 1980. Frank, my ex-husband, had his arm around me, both of us beaming with pride. We'd worked so hard to afford it, the ornate woodwork, the stained glass accent window in the entryway, the sweeping staircase. It was everything we'd dreamed of. The next pages showed the house transforming along with our family, Vanessa as a toddler in the garden I'd painstakingly planted, Derek learning to ride a bike in the long driveway, birthday parties on the wraparound porch, Christmases by the original marble fireplace. Even after Frank left, the house remained the one constant in our lives, the foundation I made sure never crumbled, no matter how tight money got. The last photo in the album was taken just a month ago, me standing alone on those same porch steps. Gray-haired but still standing straight, still independent. Still home. "Excuse me, are you Eleanor? The new arrival?" I looked up to see a woman about my age peering around my doorframe. She had short silver hair cut in a stylish bob and wore a cardigan that looked hand-knitted. "Yes," I replied, closing my album. "And you are?" "Marilyn Cooper." She stepped into my room without invitation. "I'm across the hall. Been here 8 months now." She glanced around my space appraisingly. "You got one of the nicer rooms. Must have children with deep pockets." I bristled at the comment. "My children aren't paying for this. I am." It was true. Despite Vanessa and Derek's insistence that I needed to move here, they weren't footing the bill. They'd helped me set up automatic payments from my own savings account, the one I'd built slowly over decades of careful budgeting. The one that was supposed to let me travel in my retirement, finally see that ocean. Marilyn raised an eyebrow. "Well, that makes one of us. My son sold my house right out from under me to pay for this place. Told me it was an investment in my care. What he meant was, he wanted his inheritance early." She barked out a laugh that held no humor. "The worst part? I signed the papers. He convinced me it was for the best." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Your son sold your house?" "Sure did. Got a great price for it too in that neighborhood. I heard him bragging on the phone about the profit when he thought I was napping." Marilyn shrugged, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. "Anyway, just wanted to say hello. Fair warning, the meatloaf on Wednesdays is inedible, and Mr. Peterson, in 210, likes to wander into the wrong rooms at night. Lock your door." With that, she turned and left as abruptly as she'd arrived. I sat frozen, her words echoing in my mind. A suspicion that had been barely forming now crystallized into something harder, sharper. Why had my children been so insistent about this place? Why had Derek already called twice asking if I needed him to take care of anything back at the house? Why had Vanessa been so eager to sort through my belongings, deciding what I should keep and what should be donated? With trembling hands, I reached for my phone. I dialed my old neighbor, Martha, who'd lived next door to me for over 30 years. "Eleanor," she exclaimed when she answered. "How's the new place? I've been meaning to come visit." "Martha," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Has anyone been at my house since I left?" There was a pause. "Well, yes. Your kids have been in and out all week. In fact, there's a real estate agent there right now. I just saw them putting up a sign. I thought you knew." The phone nearly slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. "A sign? What kind of sign?" "A for sale sign, honey. Isn't that the plan?" "Derek told me you were downsizing, that the house was too much for you now." I don't remember saying goodbye to Martha. I don't remember dropping the phone or the tears that must have started falling. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on that strange bed, in that strange room, with the realization that my children, the ones I'd sacrificed everything for, had orchestrated this entire move to get their hands on my house, my home. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely breathe. All those concerned conversations about my safety, about stairs being dangerous at my age, about how I deserved to relax in my golden years, they were never about my well-being. They were about the 4-bedroom Victorian in a now trendy, historic neighborhood that had recently seen property values soar. I thought back to the conversation 3 months ago when they'd first broached the subject of assisted living. We'd been sitting in my kitchen, the one I'd remodeled myself 10 years ago, saving for each appliance, installing the tile backsplash with my own hands. "Mom, we've been thinking," Vanessa had started, exchanging a look with Derek. "This house is becoming too much for you." "What do you mean?" I'd asked, genuinely confused. "I manage just fine." Derek had leaned forward, his expression serious. "The property taxes keep going up, the maintenance never ends, and the neighborhood has changed. It's not as safe as it used to be." The neighborhood had changed, but not in the way he was implying. Young professionals had been moving in, renovating the beautiful old homes, opening boutique shops and artisanal cafes. If anything, It was safer than it had been in years. Vanessa had joined in. Plus, all those stairs, Mom. Dr. Michaels said your knee isn't getting any better. What if you fell and no one was there to help? I'd waved away their concerns. I sleep downstairs in the guest room now, and I have one of those medical alert things if there's ever an emergency. I'd patted my pocket where the device hung on a lanyard, but they hadn't let up. Week after week, they'd come with brochures from different senior communities. They'd arranged tours. They'd left messages with cost breakdowns, highlighting how the sale of my house would more than cover the expenses of Sunset Pines for the rest of your life, Mom. And eventually, worn down by their persistence and genuinely believing they were concerned for me, I'd agreed. I'd let Vanessa pack up my most precious belongings while Derek handled the paperwork. I'd handed over my power of attorney when they insisted it would make managing my finances easier. My finances, my house, my life. With sudden clarity, I reached for my purse and pulled out the folder of documents they'd given me when they'd dropped me off yesterday. I hadn't bothered to look through them, trusting that everything was in order as they'd promised. Now, I flipped through the pages with growing horror. There it was, a real estate listing agreement with my signature on it. Except, I hadn't signed this. It looked like my signature, but the slight wobble in the H of Harris was wrong. Someone had forged it. My own children had forged my signature to sell my house. The room spun around me as rage and disbelief warred in my chest. How could they do this? How could they deceive me so completely, manipulate me into leaving my home and then steal it from under me? But as the initial shock began to fade, another emotion took its place. Determination. They thought I was a helpless, old woman they could ship off and forget. They thought I'd sit here quietly while they liquidated my life's greatest asset. They were wrong, because what my children had failed to consider in their grand plan was that I wasn't actually the feeble, dependent mother they'd convinced themselves I was. I'd raised them alone, kept that house running on a teacher's salary, and navigated every crisis life had thrown at me. I hadn't survived all that by being weak, and they'd missed one crucial detail in their scheme, a detail that was about to turn their perfect plan upside down. I reached back into my purse and pulled out a small, worn envelope I'd kept with me for over 30 years. Inside was the original deed to the house, along with a document Frank had signed during our divorce proceedings. It stated clearly that while I retained full ownership of the property during my lifetime, upon my death, the house would pass directly to a trust established for our future grandchildren's education, not to Vanessa, not to Derek, to my grandchildren when they were ready for college. Frank and I had set it up this way because, despite our failed marriage, we both believed in education above all else. It was the one thing we'd agreed on when splitting our assets, that the house would eventually help our grandchildren the way we'd helped our children. I'd never told Vanessa or Derek about this arrangement. There had never been a reason to. It wouldn't affect them until after I was gone. But now, this document was my shield, my sword, and my salvation. I picked up my phone again with steady hands and dialed a number I'd memorized long ago but rarely used. Lawrence James Law Offices, a receptionist answered. "This is Eleanor Harris. I need to speak with Lawrence immediately." Lawrence had been my friend since college, long before he became one of the city's most respected attorneys. He'd handled my divorce, my will, and every legal matter in between. "Eleanor," Lawrence's familiar voice came on the line moments later. "This is a surprise. How's retirement treating you?" "Not well, Lawrence," I replied, my voice calm and measured despite the storm inside me. "My children have put me in a nursing home and are trying to sell my house without my consent. I need your help, and I need it now." There was a pause. Then, Lawrence's tone changed, all warmth replaced by professional focus. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told him about the months of pressure, about the forged signature, about the trust Frank and I had established. As I spoke, a plan began to form. Not just to stop the sale of my house, but to teach my children the lesson they so desperately needed to learn. "Eleanor," Lawrence said when I finished, "what you're describing is elder abuse and fraud. We can stop this immediately with an injunction. But I have to ask, what do you want to do about your children? This could result in serious legal consequences for them." I thought about Vanessa and Derek, about the babies I'd held in my arms, the children I'd raised, the adults I thought I knew. My heart ached with betrayal, but beneath that pain was something else: disappointment. Somewhere along the way, I'd failed to teach them the values that mattered most: honesty, integrity, respect. "I don't want to press charges," I finally said. "At least not yet. First, I want to teach them a lesson they'll never forget." Lawrence chuckled, a sound that brought me back to our younger days, when we'd been idealistic college students ready to change the world. "I was hoping you'd say that. You always did have a flair for the instructive moment, Professor Harris." For the first time since arriving at Sunset Pines, I smiled, a real smile that reached all the way to my eyes. "Let's get to work then. But first, I need you to keep this quiet. Let them think their plan is working. Let them think I don't know." "And then?" Lawrence asked. "And then," I said, feeling more alive than I had in months, "we spring the trap." As I hung up the phone, I looked around the small room that my children had intended to be my prison. Instead, it would be my war room, the place where I planned my comeback. They thought they'd shuffled me off to the sidelines of life, but they were about to discover that I was still very much in the game. Outside my window, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that put the pale watercolor on my wall to shame. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, I would rest, secure in the knowledge that while my children thought they had outmaneuvered me, they had actually walked right into my territory. They'd forgotten who had taught them to play chess in the first place. The morning after my conversation with Lawrence, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. I'd spent half the night making notes, sketching out plans, and remembering details about my house that might prove useful. It was amazing how clarity could sharpen your mind, even at 68. I dressed carefully in the clothes Vanessa had selected for me. Sensible, elastic waist pants and a button-up blouse that made me look every bit the helpless grandmother they wanted me to be. The disguise was perfect. No one would suspect the storm brewing beneath my placid exterior. At precisely 9:30 a.m., my phone rang. "Derek, right on schedule." "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice overly bright. "How was your first night?" "Oh, just lovely," I replied, matching his false cheeriness. "Everyone's been so nice. How are things at home?" There was a slight pause. "Well, that's actually why I'm calling. Vanessa and I are going through some of your things, figuring out what to keep and what to, pass along. The house is just so full." I murmured, picturing him standing in my living room, eyeing the antique secretary desk that had been my grandmother's, the one he'd always admired. I was thinking about my jewelry box. There are some pieces in there I'd like to keep with me." "Your jewelry?" Another pause. "I think Vanessa already packed that up for safekeeping. Wouldn't want it to get lost or stolen at the facility." Of course she had. The diamond earrings Frank had given me on our 10th anniversary alone would fetch enough to fund a luxury vacation. "I understand," I said mildly. "Just promise me you won't get rid of my photo albums. The memories are so important at my age." "Sure, Mom. No problem." He sounded relieved that I wasn't putting up a fight. "Listen, I've got to run. Vanessa and I are meeting with someone about the house. Just some routine maintenance stuff." The real estate agent, he meant. Preparing to list my home of 40 years, as if it were nothing more than an investment property to flip. "Of course, dear. You two take care of everything. I trust you completely." After we hung up, I smiled grimly at my reflection in the small bathroom mirror. Trust, I whispered to myself. Such a fragile thing. I had just finished applying a touch of lipstick when there was a knock at my door. I half expected it to be Marilyn, coming to share more depressing tales of filial betrayal, but instead, it was Cynthia, the care manager. "Good morning, Mrs. Harris. You look lovely today. Ready for breakfast?" I nodded, grabbing my purse. "Actually, Cynthia, I was wondering about the transportation services mentioned in the brochure. The ones for medical appointments and such?" "Oh, yes," she replied, leading me down the hallway. "We have a shuttle that runs 3 times a week to the medical plaza and shopping center. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. You just need to sign up a day in advance." Perfect. Today was Monday, which meant I could be out of here tomorrow. "Wonderful," I said. "I just remembered I have a standing appointment with my ophthalmologist every month. Would you mind if I sign up for tomorrow's shuttle?" "Not at all. I'll put you on the list right after breakfast." The dining room at Sunset Pines was designed to look like an upscale restaurant, with cloth napkins and attentive servers, but it couldn't disguise the institutional nature of the place. Residents in various stages of alertness sat at tables, some chatting animatedly, others staring vacantly at their plates. Cynthia led me to a table where Marilyn was already seated, along with 2 other women I hadn't met. "Ladies, this is Eleanor Harris, our newest resident," Cynthia announced before leaving me to my fate. "We've met," Marilyn said, eyeing me over her coffee cup. "Sleep well?" "Like a log," I lied, taking the empty seat beside her. "This is Judith," Marilyn pointed to a frail-looking woman with a pearl necklace, "and Gloria." She indicated a robust woman with bright red lipstick that had missed her lip line by a 1/4 inch. "Welcome to the Sunset Pines Penitentiary, where we're all serving life sentences," Gloria announced with a hearty laugh. "What'd you do to get locked up?" "Gloria," Judith admonished softly, "don't be crude." I surprised myself by laughing. "I made the mistake of having a house my children wanted to sell." Gloria slapped the table. "Ha! Told you, Judith. Same story, different player. Real estate is the #1 reason people end up in these places." "That's not true," Judith protested. "Some people actually need the care." "Sure, some do," Marilyn agreed. "But look around. Half the people here could manage just fine in their own homes with a little help. But that doesn't free up assets for the kids, does it?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Has anyone ever fought back? Gotten their house back?" The 3 women exchanged glances. "Herman Goldstein in 307 tried," Gloria volunteered. "His son sold his brownstone in the city. Herman hired a lawyer, but he had a stroke before the case went to court. Now he can barely speak, so that was that. Vivian Clark's daughter sold her farm out from under her," Judith added quietly. "Vivian was so heartbroken she stopped eating. They have her on a feeding tube now. Not exactly the encouraging stories I was hoping for." "What about you 3? I asked. "Did you all lose your homes?" "My kids didn't have to force me," Gloria said with a shrug. "After my Arthur died, the house felt like a mausoleum. I sold it myself and moved here. Turns out I hate it, but at least it was my choice." "My stepdaughter convinced me to sign over my condo," Judith murmured, twisting her napkin. "She said she'd invest the money for me, make sure I was taken care of. I haven't seen a penny." "And you know my story," Marilyn concluded. "Son sold my house, pocketed the difference between the sale and this place. Comes to visit once a month with his perfect family. Takes photos to post online about what a devoted son he is." I digested this information as a server placed a plate of rubbery scrambled eggs and toast in front of me. These women had been outmaneuvered by their own children, just as mine had attempted to do to me. The difference was, I'd caught on before it was too late. "My children didn't know about a trust my ex-husband and I set up," I explained, keeping my voice low. "The house can't actually be sold without violating the terms. My lawyer is helping me stop the sale." 3 pairs of eyes widened in unison. "You're fighting back?" Gloria whispered, sounding impressed. "Damn right I am." "What can we do to help?" Marilyn asked immediately, a spark lighting her previously cynical eyes. I smiled, touched by their instant solidarity. "For now, just keep it quiet that I'm planning anything. If my children call or visit, I'm a happy, complacent old lady who loves her new home." All 3 nodded solemnly, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected to find at Sunset. Pines. Allies. After breakfast, I returned to my room and called Lawrence. He answered on the first ring. "Eleanor, I was just about to call you. I've done some digging. The real estate agent is Amanda Collins from Prestige Properties. They've already scheduled an open house for this Sunday." My stomach lurched. "So soon?" "They're moving quickly. But here's what you need to know. I've found the trust documents, and they're ironclad." Frank was very specific. "The house remains in trust for the education of future grandchildren, with you as the trustee during your lifetime. There's no legal way for Vanessa and Derek to sell it without your explicit consent, which I'm assuming you never gave." "Absolutely not." That's what I thought. "Their forged power of attorney won't hold up in court, especially since I have the original trust documents with Frank's signature. We can shut this down immediately with an injunction, but that doesn't teach them the lesson they need to learn," I finished for him. "Exactly." I thought for a moment. "When does the injunction need to be filed to stop the sale?" "We have some time. The sale couldn't close for at least 30 days after an offer is accepted. And they haven't even held the open house yet." An idea began to form in my mind. What if we let them get all the way to closing? Let them think they've won, and then pull the rug out. Lawrence chuckled. "Always the tactician, Eleanor. It could work, but there are risks. If they find legitimate buyers, those people would be inconvenienced." "Good point." I drummed my fingers on the nightstand. "What if we become the buyers?" "What do you mean?" "What if you, or someone you trust, put in an offer on my house? We let Derek and Vanessa think they've found a buyer, let them go through all the motions, get right to the closing table, and then reveal it was a setup all along." There was a moment of silence as Lawrence considered. "That's actually brilliant. I have a colleague who could act as the buyer. We'd need to make a credible offer, though. Your children would be suspicious if it's too fast or too easy." "Make it a little under asking price," I suggested. "They're greedy enough to jump at anything close." "And what about you? Where do you fit into this plan?" I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "I'm going to be moving back home, Lawrence. Tomorrow." "Tomorrow? Are you sure that's wise? If they realize you've left Sunset Pines..." "They won't," I assured him. "I've made some friends here who are willing to cover for me. As far as Derek and Vanessa know, I'll still be sitting in this little room, watching game shows and taking my medication like a good mother." I explained my plan to use the shuttle service to leave the facility and how I intended to stay at the small guest house behind my property, a converted garage apartment that Frank and I had built years ago for his mother, though she'd passed, before ever using it. It was hidden from the main house by a stand of mature oak trees, accessible by a side path that wasn't visible from the driveway. I could live there undetected, watching as my children dismantled my life piece by piece. "It's risky," Lawrence warned. "If they find you there..." "They won't," I said firmly. "Derek and Vanessa never visit the back of the property. Too many mosquitoes," Vanessa always complained. "And Derek's allergic to oak pollen. Trust me, they'll never know I'm there." After another moment's hesitation, Lawrence agreed. "All right, but promise me you'll be careful, and call me every day to check in." "I promise." After hanging up, I spent the rest of the day preparing. I requested a meeting with the facility director and explained that I needed to maintain my privacy due to a sensitive family situation. I hinted that my children had pressured me into coming here, not entirely a lie. and that I wasn't ready for them to know I was settling in. The director, a woman about my own age named Mrs. Powell, seemed to understand immediately. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Harris, we see this type of situation more often than you might think," she said with a knowing look. "I'll make a note in your file that all calls from your children should be directed to your personal cell phone, not the room phone. And if they visit without calling ahead, tell them I'm at an activity or resting. Whatever buys me time to prepare." Mrs. Powell nodded. "Consider it done." That evening, I joined Gloria, Judith, and Marilyn for dinner. Over dry chicken and instant mashed potatoes, I outlined my plan and what I needed from them. "You're asking us to lie to the staff?" Judith looked scandalized. "Not lie exactly," I hedged. "Just create a diversion if necessary. And maybe occasionally sign my name to the activity attendance sheet." Gloria cackled with delight. "I haven't had this much fun since Arthur and I faked a flat tire to get out of his sister's wedding." "I'm in." "Me too," Marilyn said firmly. "Those kids of yours need to learn they can't just throw their mother away like yesterday's newspaper." Judith wrung her hands but eventually nodded. "I suppose I can help. But please be careful, Eleanor. If you get caught—" "I won't," I assured her with more confidence than I felt. "And once this is over, I promise I'll help each of you anyway I can. No one should end up here unless it's truly what they want." That night, I packed a small bag with essentials: medication, toiletries, a change of clothes, my cell phone charger, and the all-important trust documents. I tucked it under my bed, ready for tomorrow's escape. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought about what I was about to do. Was I being too harsh? Should I simply confront my children, tell them I knew what they were trying to do and demand they stop? No. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. They had decided I was dispensable, an obstacle to their inheritance. A lesson needed to be taught, one they would never forget. I must have drifted off because I awoke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. Today was the day. I dressed quickly in layers. The medical center would be air-conditioned, and slipped my prepared bag into a larger tote that looked like something a woman my age might take to a doctor's appointment, full of tissues, hand sanitizer, and perhaps a paperback novel. At breakfast, my 3 co-conspirators wished me luck with meaningful glances. "Don't forget to sign up for bingo tonight," Marilyn said loudly as we parted. "I'll save you a seat." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied with a wink. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, I boarded the Sunset Pines shuttle along with 4 other residents, all legitimately headed to medical appointments. The driver, a bored-looking young man named Kevin, barely glanced at the roster as we climbed aboard. "West Side Medical Plaza, right?" he confirmed as I settled into a seat near the back. "That's right," I smiled. "Dr. Hoffman, ophthalmology." Kevin nodded disinterestedly and closed the door. As the shuttle pulled away from Sunset Pines, I stared out the window at the bland landscaping and cookie-cutter buildings receding behind us. A wave of rebellious joy washed over me. I was escaping. I was taking back control. My children thought they'd tucked me away in a neat little box, out of sight and out of mind. They had no idea what was coming. The woman beside me, an octogenarian with a hearing aid, caught my smile and leaned over. "First day out, dear. It gets easier, I promise." I patted her hand. "Thank you, but I have a feeling today is going to be just fine." The shuttle turned onto the main road, heading toward the medical plaza, and my freedom. As the familiar streets of my city flashed by outside the window, I felt younger and more alive than I had in years. Vanessa and Derek had made a critical error in judgment when they decided to take what was mine. They'd forgotten who I was, not just their mother, but a woman who had survived abandonment, raised 2 children alone, kept a Victorian home standing through leaky roofs and broken furnaces, taught high school English to generations of teenagers, and never, ever given up. They'd forgotten that before I was their mother, I was Eleanor Harris. And Eleanor Harris wasn't going down without a fight. The shuttle pulled into the Medical Plaza parking lot, and Kevin announced a pickup time of 1 p.m. The other passengers shuffled off toward their various appointments, but I hung back, waiting, until Kevin had helped the last passenger down the steps. Then I approached him with my most grandmotherly smile. "Kevin, dear, I've just remembered my niece is meeting me here to take me to lunch after my appointment. I won't need a ride back to Sunset Pines today." Kevin scratched his head. "I'm supposed to account for everyone." I pressed a $20 bill into his hand. "I'd hate for you to wait unnecessarily. I'm sure you have better things to do." He pocketed the money without hesitation. "Have a nice lunch, Mrs. Harris." As Kevin drove away, I glanced at my watch. Lawrence would be waiting just around the corner in the coffee shop we'd agreed upon. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Now, for the real challenge, reclaiming my home and teaching my children that some lessons are learned the hardest way possible. I adjusted my tote bag on my shoulder and walked purposefully toward the coffee shop, my heart racing with a mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in months, I felt truly alive. No longer a victim, but a woman with a mission. Vanessa and Derek had no idea what was coming, but they were about to find out. The coffee shop was busy with the late morning rush, professionals, on break, medical staff grabbing caffeine between appointments, and patients killing time before seeing their doctors. I spotted Lawrence immediately, sitting in a corner booth, his silver hair and tortoiseshell glasses as familiar to me as my own reflection. He stood when he saw me, his face breaking into a wide smile. "Eleanor," he said, pulling me into a quick hug. "You look well for a prison escapee." I laughed, sliding into the booth across from him. "I feel like one. Hearts racing, palms sweating. It's rather exhilarating. Enjoy it while it lasts. We've got work to do." He pushed a manila folder toward me. "These are copies of the trust. Documents, power of attorney forms, both the legitimate one and the forged one, and the paperwork for the injunction we'll file when the time is right." I thumbed through the documents, pausing at the power of attorney with my supposed signature. The forgery was good, clearly done by someone who had access to my genuine signature, but as Lawrence had pointed out, the slight wobble in the H gave it away. My heart ached anew at the evidence of my children's betrayal. "The car is parked out back," Lawrence continued, checking his watch. "My colleague Angela is handling the offer on your house. She'll present herself as a real estate investor looking to renovate and flip premium properties. Just enough competition to make your children think they've hit the jackpot, but not so aggressive that they get suspicious." I nodded, still studying the forged signature. "Have you spoken with the trust administrator?" "Yes, Philip Carson at First National. He was shocked, to say the least. The bank's legal department is on standby to support our case when we pull the trigger." "And the guest house? Is it ready?" Lawrence nodded. "I picked up groceries this morning. Nothing perishable, mostly canned goods and dried staples. There's fresh bedding, towels, and I had the utilities turned on in my name. Cable and internet are working. The place is dusty. It's been empty for 10 years? But it's habitable." "Thank you, Lawrence." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I don't know what I'd do without you." He smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "Eleanor, are you absolutely sure about this? It's not too late to take a more conventional approach. We could file the injunction today. Have you moved back into the main house by dinner?" I shook my head firmly. "No, they need to see this through to the end. They need to understand exactly what they were willing to do to their own mother." Lawrence studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's get you home then." We left the coffee shop separately, Lawrence first, to bring the car around, and me a few minutes later, scanning the parking lot carefully to ensure no one from Sunset Pines was watching. I slipped into the passenger seat of Lawrence's sedan, and we headed toward my neighborhood. "I've been thinking," I said as we drove. What if Derek or Vanessa come to visit me at Sunset Pines while I'm gone? Unlikely, based on what you've told me about their behavior, but we've covered that base. Your new friends will tell the staff you're not feeling well, and the director already agreed to respect your privacy, right? Yes, but... And I've programmed your cell phone to forward calls from their numbers to my office line during business hours. My assistant knows to say you're in activities or therapy or napping. After hours, the calls will go to voicemail. I smiled, impressed with his thoroughness. You've thought of everything. That's what you pay me for, he replied with a wink. Though I'd do this one for free. Watching your children get their comeuppance is payment enough. We turned onto Maple Avenue, and my heart swelled at the sight of the familiar trees lining both sides of the street. Lawrence made one more turn and then pulled over, half a block from my house. Best if we don't drive right up to the property, he explained, cutting the engine. Your neighbors might recognize my car and word could get back to Derek or Vanessa. I nodded, understanding the caution. We exited the car and Lawrence retrieved my bag from the trunk. Together, we walked casually down the sidewalk, looking like nothing more than an elderly woman out for a stroll with her gentleman friend. As we approached my house, I instinctively slowed, drinking in the sight of the beautiful Victorian. Despite being early September, Vanessa had already put up fall wreaths on the double front doors, a decorating choice that made me wince. Those wreaths belonged on my doors, selected by my taste, placed by my hands. A for sale sign stood proudly in the front yard, just as Martha had said. Prestige Properties was emblazoned across the top with Amanda Collins, realtor, and a phone number below. The sight of it made my blood boil. Lawrence gently took my elbow, sensing my distress. This way, he murmured, guiding me past the house to the narrow alley that ran behind the property. The back entrance to my yard was through a wooden gate, weathered and partially hidden by overgrown ivy. I fumbled in my purse for the key. One I was certain neither of my children would remember existed. The lock was stiff from disuse, but it eventually turned with a satisfying click. We slipped through the gate and into the backyard. The garden was overgrown, not yet touched by Vanessa's aggressive pre-sale cleanup. My beloved rose bushes had sprawled beyond their beds, and the bird feeders hung empty, but the wild, untamed beauty of it made me smile. This was my sanctuary, the place where I'd spent countless summer evenings with a glass of iced tea and a good book. The guest house stood at the far end of the property, a charming miniature version of the main house, with the same gingerbread, trim and gabled roof. Lawrence produced another key and unlocked the door. Inside, sunlight filtered through dusty windows, illuminating a small but complete living space. A combination living room and kitchenette, a bedroom just large enough for a double bed, and a compact bathroom. Lawrence had been busy. The bed was made with fresh linens, the kitchenette counters were stocked with supplies, and a small table by the window held a vase of fresh flowers. It's perfect, I whispered, setting my bag down on a chair. Lawrence nodded, pleased. The refrigerator is stocked with basics. The internet password is taped to the router on the desk. And he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device. This is a motion-activated camera. It connects to the home's Wi-Fi and will send alerts to your phone if anyone approaches the guest house. I raised an eyebrow. You really did think of everything. I also left you binoculars, he said, pointing to the windowsill. For birdwatching officially, but they might come in handy for other kinds of observation. I laughed, feeling a surge of affection for my old friend. Lawrence James, I do believe you're enjoying this cloak and dagger business a bit too much. He grinned, not denying it. One last thing. He handed me a prepaid cell phone. For emergencies only. If your regular phone dies or if you need to, call me without leaving a trace. My number is the only one programmed in. I accepted the phone, tucking it into my pocket. Now what? Now, Lawrence said, checking his watch. I head back to the office to get Angela started on the offer for your house. and you settle in and start gathering intelligence. The open house is Sunday, just 5 days away. That's when things will really start moving. After Lawrence left, I took time to reacquaint myself with the guest house. It had been years since I'd set foot inside, not since Frank's mother passed away. The furniture was the same: a comfortable sofa, a small dining set, bookshelves filled with outdated mysteries, but Lawrence had added modern touches: a new flat-screen TV, a laptop computer on the desk, even a small coffee maker in the kitchenette. Unpacked my few belongings and then, unable to resist, picked up the binoculars and peered through the window toward the main house. From this vantage point, I could see the back porch and through the kitchen windows. The curtains were open, and I could make out movement inside. Adjusting the focus, I realized with a start that it was Vanessa, moving around my kitchen with the confidence of ownership. She appeared to be sorting through cabinets, removing items, and placing them in boxes on the counter. My dishes, my glassware, my cookbooks, all being evaluated, categorized, discarded, or kept based on some calculus of value I couldn't fathom. I watched, seething, as she held up a hand-painted serving bowl, a gift from my mother, examined it briefly, and then placed it in what was clearly the discard pile. How dare she? That bowl held memories of Sunday dinners, of holidays, of family gatherings that she herself had participated in as a child. Behind her, a man entered the kitchen. Not Derek, but someone in a suit, carrying a clipboard. The real estate agent, I presumed. Vanessa smiled brightly at him, gesturing around the kitchen with theatrical sweeps of her arms, selling the charm, the potential, the history of my home as if it were a script she'd rehearsed. I lowered the binoculars, my hands trembling slightly. This was harder than I'd expected, not the secrecy or the deception, but witnessing firsthand the casual dismantling of my life. But the anger that rose in me only strengthened my resolve. They would not get away with this. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Marilyn. "All clear at the prison. Staff thinks you're at doctor all day. Called Derek asking about dinner plans. Tell him nurse says you need rest tonight. No visitors." I smiled, grateful for my new allies. I quickly texted back my thanks, then dialed Derek's number, adopting the slightly quavering voice I'd noticed many residents at Sunset Pines used when speaking to their children, a voice that conveyed age, frailty, and dependence. "Mom?" Derek answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. "Everything okay?" "Oh yes, dear. Just checking in. I'm back from my eye appointment. Everything's fine, just a little tired." "That's good." I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "Listen, Vanessa and I were thinking of coming by this evening, maybe bringing dinner." "Perfect. Exactly as Marilyn had predicted." "Oh, that's so thoughtful. But the nurse said I should rest tonight." The doctor dilated my eyes, and they're still quite sensitive. "Perhaps tomorrow?" "Sure, no problem. We're pretty busy with going through the house. Lots to sort through." I bit back a retort about how they seemed awfully eager to erase all traces of me from my own home. Instead, I said sweetly, "Take your time, dear. I trust your judgment completely." "Great. Oh, and Mom? There might be some people coming through the house on Sunday. Just a few friends of the real estate agent who are interested in the neighborhood. Nothing to worry about." The open house. They couldn't even tell me the truth about that? "That sounds lovely, dear. I'm sure they'll fall in love with the place just like your father and I did all those years ago." "Right." He sounded uncomfortable. "Now. Anyway, I should go. Vanessa needs help with some boxes." "Of course. Give her my love." After hanging up, I returned to the window with the binoculars. Vanessa and the real estate agent were gone from the kitchen now, likely touring other parts of the house. I scanned the backyard, noting with dismay that they'd already removed the bird bath I'd installed when Derek was 10. He'd helped me mix the concrete and place the decorative stones around the base. Did he remember that day? Did he care? As the afternoon wore on, I alternated between watching the house and setting up my temporary home. I found an old notepad in a drawer and began documenting everything I observed: who came and went, what items appeared to be removed, conversations I could lip read through windows. If my children were going to treat me like a case study in disposal, I would treat them like subjects of an investigation. Around 4 o'clock, a truck pulled into the driveway. Clean sweep junk removal, painted on its side. My heart raced as 2 men in company t-shirts got out and approached the front door. Vanessa greeted them, pointing toward the garage. Minutes later, they began carrying out items: my gardening equipment, holiday decorations still in their storage bins, a set of wicker patio furniture I'd refinished just last summer. Junk. They were classifying my belongings, my memories, as junk to be hauled away. I forced myself to document each item dispassionately, though inside I was screaming. This was evidence. This was fuel for the reckoning to come. By early evening, the junk truck was full and departed. Vanessa and Derek, who had arrived sometime during the afternoon, locked up the house and left in separate cars. Only then did I allow myself to cry. Brief, angry tears that I quickly wiped away. This wasn't the time for self-pity. This was the time for strategy. My phone buzzed again. Lawrence this time. "Angela made the offer," his text read. "$20K below asking. Your children countered immediately, asking for $10K below asking instead. Angela has agreed. They're eager to close quickly." I smiled grimly. Of course they were eager. They wanted this. Done before I could somehow interfere. "What's our next move?" I texted back. "Angela will request a final walkthrough on closing day, 2 weeks from now. That's when we spring the trap. Can you hold out in the guest house that long?" Could I? 2 weeks of watching my children dismantle my life piece by piece? 2 weeks of hiding, of deception, of documenting their betrayal? "Absolutely," I replied. "I'm not going anywhere." The next few days fell into a pattern. I would wake early, before Derek or Vanessa were likely to arrive, and take advantage of the guest house's tiny shower. I'd eat a simple breakfast, check in with my allies at Sunset Pines, and then position myself near the window with my binoculars and notebook. Each day brought new outrages. On Wednesday, they brought in professional cleaners who scoured every surface, erasing the traces of my existence from the home I'd maintained for decades. On Thursday, a stager arrived, replacing my carefully selected furniture with generic, trendy pieces designed to appeal to younger buyers. My beloved reading chair, with its worn arms and sagging cushion that fit my body perfectly, was unceremoniously hauled away. In its place, a sleek leather monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a corporate waiting room. Friday brought landscapers who tamed my wild English-style garden into submission, ripping out plants I'd nurtured for years and replacing them with uniform shrubs and sterile mulch beds. The rose bushes I'd planted to commemorate each of my children's graduations, gone. The lilac tree that perfumed my bedroom each spring, reduced to a stump. I documented it all, my anger growing colder and more focused with each new desecration. These weren't just things they were destroying. They were extensions of me. Physical, manifestations of my life's work and love. Through it all, I maintained my cover. Each evening, I'd call either Derek or Vanessa from my cell phone, asking innocent questions about their day, never letting on that I'd witnessed their systematic erasure of my existence. I'd check in with Marilyn or Gloria at Sunset Pines, confirming that my absence remained undetected, and I'd update Lawrence on the latest developments, each outrage adding another brick to the wall of evidence we were building. Saturday, the day before the open house, was the worst yet. Derek and Vanessa arrived together in the morning, carrying coffee and pastries like they were embarking on a fun sibling project, rather than the liquidation of their mother's life. Through the kitchen window, I watched them laugh and chat as they sorted through the last of my personal items: photo albums, keepsakes, the small treasures I'd accumulated over a lifetime. Vanessa held up a small wooden box I recognized immediately. It contained the love letters Frank had written me during our courtship, before everything fell apart. She opened it, glanced at the contents, and then dropped the entire thing into a garbage bag without a second thought. Derek rifled through my photo albums, occasionally removing a picture, likely ones of himself he wanted to keep, before tossing the albums themselves into another discard pile. By afternoon, they'd filled 3 large garbage bags with the tangible remnants of my memories. Derek carried them out to his car, not even to donate, I realized with a fresh wave of pain, but to dispose of them entirely. I gripped the binoculars so tightly my knuckles turned white. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that this was never just about the house or the money. This was about erasing me, about reducing a lifetime of love and sacrifice to a financial transaction, a transfer of assets from one generation to the next. They didn't just want my house, they wanted to pretend I had never existed at all. That evening, as dusk settled over the garden, I made a decision. I set down my binoculars and notepad and quietly slipped out of the guest house. Using the key I still carried, I entered the main house through the back door for the first time since being shuttled off to Sunset Pines. The familiar smell hit me first, a mixture of lemon furniture polish, old wood, and the faint floral scent of my favorite, potpourri. But beneath those familiar notes were new ones: industrial cleaning products, fresh paint, the plastic smell of new furnishings. They'd sanitized my home, stripped it of character, of history, of me. I moved silently through the kitchen, noting the gleaming countertops now bare of the gadgets and cookbooks that had made it a working kitchen rather than a showroom. In the dining room, my antique table had been replaced by something sleek and modern, set with dishes I'd never seen before, a centerpiece I would never have chosen. The living room was worse, unrecognizable except for the bones of the house itself. My collection of first edition classics, gone from the built-in shelves. The family photos that had lined the mantel, replaced by artful arrangements of candles and generic artwork. Even the curtains had been changed from my hand-sewn floral panels to stark white sheers that let in the maximum amount of light, but offered no personality, no warmth. I climbed the stairs slowly, my hand trailing along the banister that at least still bore the small nick from when Derek had tried to slide down it at age 8. The bedrooms had been similarly transformed, stripped of identity, staged to appeal to the broadest possible market. My bedroom, my sanctuary for 40 years, now looked like a high-end hotel room. Impersonal, designed for temporary occupation rather than a life lived. In what had once been Vanessa's room, now staged as a home office, I found what I was looking for, the garbage bags Derek had filled but apparently forgotten to take with him. I opened them carefully, sifting through the contents with growing dismay. Photo albums, greeting cards saved over decades, small mementos from trips and special occasions, all deemed worthless by my children. With trembling hands, I retrieved the wooden box of Frank's letters, a handful of the most precious photos, and my grandmother's handwritten recipe book. These, at least, I could save. The rest would have to remain, sacrificed to maintain my cover. As I prepared to leave, a car pulled into the driveway. Lights swept across the front windows, and I heard the unmistakable sound of Vanessa's laugh. They were back. I froze, clutching my salvaged treasures to my chest. Discovery now would ruin everything, the lesson, the reckoning, all of it. Heart-pounding, I slipped into the hall bathroom just as the front door opened. I could hear them in the entryway, Vanessa's voice animated as she discussed final preparations for tomorrow's open house. From my hiding place, I could make out snippets of their conversation. Should be at least 3 serious offers by Monday. Thinking of using my share for that condo in Miami. Can't believe how much these old places are going for now. They moved into the kitchen, their voices fading slightly. I seized the opportunity, slipping out of the bathroom and down the back stairs that led to the kitchen's rear entrance. I could see them through the swinging door. Derek leaning against the counter, Vanessa rummaging in the refrigerator. One more step and I'd be in their line of sight. I held my breath, waiting for them to turn away. Derek's phone rang, and he pulled it from his pocket, frowning at the screen. "It's Sunset Pines," he told Vanessa, then answered. "Hello? Yes, this is Derek Harris." My blood ran cold. Had they discovered my absence? Was my plan about to collapse around me? I watched Derek's face carefully, looking for any sign of suspicion or alarm, but he merely nodded, looking annoyed rather than concerned. "Yes, I understand. No, that's fine. Just have her call me when she's feeling better." He hung up, turning to Vanessa. "Mom's not taking calls tonight. Nurse says she's got a migraine or something." Vanessa shrugged, unconcerned. "Probably for the best. We don't need her getting all emotional the night before the open house. You know how she is." "Yeah," Derek agreed, reaching for his keys. "Speaking of which, we should get going. Early morning tomorrow." As they moved toward the front of the house, I slipped out the back door, clutching my rescued treasures to my chest. I made my way silently across the yard, my heart still racing, and safely back into the guest house. Only then did I allow myself to breathe normally again. I carefully placed the saved items in my suitcase, then pulled out my phone to text Marilyn a thank you for the timely intervention. Her reply came immediately. "That's what cellmates are for. Operation Payback still on track?" I smiled grimly as I typed my response. "More than ever. The open house is tomorrow. Then the real show begins." Tomorrow, strangers would walk through my home, admiring the staged perfection, unaware of the real story behind the motivated sellers. In 2 weeks, my children would sit at a closing table, ready to collect their blood money. And I would be there, watching it all, gathering evidence for the moment when justice would finally be served. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught a glimpse of myself in the small bathroom mirror. The woman who stared back at me wasn't the compliant, agreeable mother my children had manipulated. She was a fighter, clear-eyed and resolute. They thought they'd written the final chapter of my story. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Perfect weather for an open house. I was up before the sun, unable to sleep with the knowledge that today strangers would parade through my home, evaluating its worth, imagining their lives in spaces that still held the echoes of mine. I made a cup of instant coffee and positioned myself at my observation post by the window. The house was still dark, but a car pulled into the driveway just after 7. The real estate agent, Amanda Collins. I recognized her from her website photo, mid-30s, blonde highlights, power suit. She carried a portfolio and what appeared to be a box of freshly baked cookies. The oldest trick in the real estate book, the scent of baked goods to create. The illusion of hominess in a space that had been deliberately stripped of all personality. An hour later, Derek arrived, followed shortly by Vanessa. They appeared to be taking direction from Amanda, moving furniture slightly, adjusting window treatments, placing fresh flowers on tables, creating the perfect illusion of a happy home, ready for new owners to create their own memories. The irony wasn't lost on me. They dismantled my actual happy home to create this sterile facsimile. At exactly noon, Amanda placed the open house sign at the end of the driveway. Within minutes, the first prospective buyers arrived, a young couple with a toddler, looking wide-eyed at the grand old house. Throughout the afternoon, a steady stream of people came and went. Some lingered, clearly impressed. Others left quickly, perhaps put off by the asking price or the amount of maintenance an older home would require. Through my binoculars, I studied each potential buyer. Would one of these strangers end up living in my home? Would children I'd never meet grow up in those rooms, unaware of the decades of life that had unfolded within those walls before them? Around 3 o'clock, a well-dressed woman in her 40s arrived alone. She carried an expensive handbag and wore tailored clothes. Angela, Lawrence's colleague. I watched as she toured the house, spending an appropriate amount of time in each room, asking questions that had Amanda nodding eagerly. She looked exactly like what she was pretending to be, a successful professional with money to spend and an eye for quality property. As the day wore on, I texted with Lawrence, who confirmed that Angela would submit her offer tonight after the open house concluded. "Your children won't be able to resist," he wrote. "The terms will be too perfect." By 5 o'clock, the stream of visitors had dwindled. Amanda collected her signs, and Derek and Vanessa departed, looking pleased with themselves. I made a quick call to Marilyn, confirming that all was still quiet at Sunset Pines. Then I settled in for another night of vigilance. Monday brought new developments. From my window, I could see Derek pacing in the kitchen, talking animatedly on his phone. Vanessa arrived shortly after, practically running from her car to the house. Something was happening. My phone buzzed with a text from Lawrence. "Offer accepted. Angela is now under contract to purchase your house. Closing set for 2 weeks from today." So that was it. My children had accepted the offer from our plant, eager to cash in on their inheritance before I could somehow interfere. The trap was set. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Inspectors came and went. Vanessa and Derek made multiple trips to the house, often carrying out boxes of items they'd decided were worth keeping after all. I documented everything meticulously, building a detailed record of their betrayal. I managed my double life carefully. Daily check-ins with my allies at Sunset Pines ensured my cover remained intact. Regular calls with my children maintained, the illusion that I was settling into my new life, blissfully unaware of their machinations. And nightly updates to Lawrence kept our plan on track. "Are you sure you're holding up okay?" he asked during one such call. A week into my surveillance. "It can't be easy watching them like this." "I'm fine," I assured him. Though the truth was more complicated. The anger that had initially fueled me had crystallized into something harder, colder. I'd moved beyond shock and hurt to a kind of detached observation. These people dismantling my life were strangers to me now. Not the children I'd raised, but adults who had revealed their true characters through their actions. "The closing is scheduled for next Friday," Lawrence reminded me. "That's when we'll make our move. Are you ready?" Was I ready to expose my children's deception, to reclaim my home, to teach them the lesson they so desperately needed to learn? "More than ready," I confirmed. The night before the closing, I could barely sleep. Tomorrow would be the culmination of weeks of planning, of deception, of painful observation. I packed my few belongings, ready to move back into my real home. Once the dust settled, I was up early, watching as Derek arrived at the house around 8, wearing a suit and looking excited. Vanessa joined him an hour later, equally dressed up. They were preparing to accept a check for hundreds of thousands of dollars. My money, my equity, my life's investment. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang. "Lawrence, we're in position at the title company," he said without preamble. "Angela is here, as are the representatives from the bank and the trust. Your children just arrived, looking like cats who found the cream." I smiled grimly. "And the court reporter?" "In place and ready to record everything. The injunction papers are prepared. Are you sure you don't want to be here for this?" I debated this point extensively with Lawrence. Part of me wanted to see their faces when the truth was revealed, but ultimately, I'd decided on a different approach. "No. I think it will be more effective if I'm waiting at home when they return. Let them have their public humiliation first, then their private reckoning." "Understood. I'll call you as soon as it's done." After hanging up, I moved quickly. I gathered my belongings, locked up the guest house, and let myself into the main house using my key. The place was eerily quiet, stripped of most of the furniture I'd known, but still unmistakably my home. I walked through each room slowly, reacquainting myself with spaces that had been transformed in my absence. In the living room, I settled into the one piece of my original furniture they deemed stylish enough to keep, a wingback chair by the fireplace that had been reupholstered in a trendy gray fabric. From here, I had a clear view of the driveway. I would see them the moment they returned, defeated and exposed. At 11:30, my phone rang again. "Lawrence." "It's done," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "You should have seen their faces, Eleanor." When the trust administrator stood up and announced that the sale couldn't proceed because the property was held in trust for your future grandchildren, well, Derek turned so white I thought he might faint. I closed, my eyes picturing the scene. "And Vanessa?" She tried to argue, claimed there must be some mistake. That's when I presented the original trust documents and the evidence of forgery on the power of attorney. She stopped talking pretty quickly after that. What happened next? The bank representative informed them that attempting to sell a property held in trust without the trustee's consent constitutes fraud. The court reporter took their statements, or rather their lack of statements, since both of them refused to say anything once they realized how much trouble they were in. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "And legally, where do things stand?" "The sale is officially dead. Angela has withdrawn her offer, citing material misrepresentation. The title company has documented the fraudulent attempt. And I've filed papers to have your power of attorney formally revoked." "Will there be criminal charges?" I asked, surprised by the note of hesitation in my own voice. They had betrayed me, deceived me, tried to steal my home and erase my existence. Yet, some small part of me still recoiled at the thought of my children facing legal consequences. Lawrence seemed to sense my conflict. "That's entirely up to you, Eleanor. There's enough evidence for a fraud case, certainly. But if you prefer to handle this as a family matter, let me see how our conversation goes when they get here," I decided. "I'll let you know." Fair enough. They left about 10 minutes ago. Should be arriving soon, I imagine. I thanked him and hung up, settling deeper into the chair to wait. I didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, I heard a car pull into the driveway, doors slamming, and raised voices approaching the front door. The lock turned. They still had their keys, of course, and Derek burst in first, face flushed with anger, Vanessa close. Behind him. "I can't believe this," he was saying as they entered. "How could we not know about that trust? Dad never said a word about it." "Because he knew we'd fight it," Vanessa replied, her voice tight with frustration. "God, this is a disaster. We've already spent money on the staging, the cleaning, the landscaping." "Forget about those expenses," Derek snapped. "What about the condo deposit I put down? What about your kitchen renovation? We were counting on this money." I cleared my throat softly. Both of them froze, then slowly turned toward the sound. Their expressions when they saw me sitting calmly in the living room were everything I had hoped for: shock, confusion, and the dawning horror of realization. "Mom?" Vanessa managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at Sunset Pines." I smiled, the expression not reaching my eyes. "Am I? How interesting. I seem to recall this being my house. The question is, what are you two doing here, trying to sell property that isn't yours to sell?" Derek recovered first, his face shifting from shock to defensive anger. "How long have you been here?" "Long enough," I replied mildly. "Long enough to watch you pack my life into boxes. Long enough to see you throw away photo albums like they were yesterday's newspaper. Long enough to witness you erase 40 years of my existence so you could cash in on the equity I built in this house." Vanessa took a step forward, arms outstretched placatingly. "Mom, you're confused. We were only trying to help. Sunset Pines is expensive and we needed a way to make sure your care was covered." "Stop." My voice cut through her excuses like a knife. "I've listened to enough lies. You didn't place me in that facility because you were concerned about my welfare. You did it to get me out of the way so you could sell my house and split the proceeds. That's not true, Derek protested, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. Isn't it? I stood, drawing myself up to my full height. Then explain the forged power of attorney. Explain why you never mentioned the sale to me. Explain why you were so quick to discard everything that made this house a home. Silence fell, heavy and damning. Neither of my children could look me in the eye. I moved to the mantel, where a family photo had once stood, now replaced by a generic piece of art. I raised you both to be better than this. I worked 2 jobs to put you through college, Derek. I helped with the down payment on your first condo, Vanessa. I have supported you, loved you, sacrificed for you your entire lives. And this is how you repay me? By shipping me off to die in a facility I never wanted to be in, while you liquidate my assets. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, whether from genuine remorse or simply frustration at being caught. I couldn't tell. Mom, please, you have to understand. We were worried about you living alone. The stairs, the maintenance, it was too much. If you were truly concerned, I replied evenly, you would have discussed options with me. You would have respected my wishes. You would have been honest. We just wanted what was best for you, Derek insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. No, I said softly. You wanted what was best for yourselves, and you were willing to sacrifice me to get it. I crossed to the window, looking out at the garden that had been stripped of my beloved roses. Do you know what the hardest part was? It wasn't discovering your plan. It wasn't even watching you dismantle my home. It was realizing that somewhere along the way, I had failed as a mother. Derek's head snapped up. Failed? You didn't... I must have, I continued, because I raised children who could look at their mother and see only dollar signs, who could erase her life without a second thought, who could lie and deceive and forge documents, all while telling themselves they were doing the right thing. The silence that followed was deafening. My words hung in the air between us, impossible to deny or explain away. Finally, Vanessa spoke, her voice small. What happens now? I turned to face them both. Now, you have a choice to make. We can handle this as a family matter, or we can let the legal system take its course. Lawrence has everything he needs to pursue fraud charges against both of you. The decision is mine. Derek blanched. Fraud charges? Mom, you can't be serious. That would destroy our careers, our reputations. And shipping me off to Sunset Pines wouldn't have destroyed me? I asked quietly. Selling my home out from under me wouldn't have left me devastated. You were willing to sacrifice my happiness for your financial gain. Why should I protect you from the consequences of your actions? Vanessa moved forward, dropping to her knees beside my chair. Please, Mom. We made a terrible mistake. We got caught up in the money, in the possibilities. We lost sight of what really matters. Which is? You, she whispered, tears flowing freely now. Our family, our history together, everything this house represents. I studied her face, searching for sincerity. Then I looked at Derek, still standing awkwardly by the doorway, looking like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar, rather than a grown man who had nearly committed fraud. I'm not pressing charges, I said finally. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I refuse to let your betrayal change who I am. I've spent my life nurturing, protecting, building up. I won't end it by tearing down, even when it's justified. The relief on their faces was palpable but short-lived. However, I continued, things will change. I'm moving back into my home, immediately. The trust will remain in place. This house will go to your children's education, not to your bank accounts. And you will both need to earn back my trust, which will take time and genuine effort, Derek. nodded quickly. Of course, Mom. Whatever you say. Vanessa squeezed my hand. Thank you. We don't deserve your mercy. No, I agreed. You don't. But perhaps that's the final lesson I needed to teach you. That mercy isn't earned, it's given. Even when it's difficult. Even when it hurts. I stood, moving toward the kitchen. Now, I'm going to make a cup of tea in my kitchen, and then we're going to start bringing back the things you've removed, my furniture, my photographs, my memories. This house will be a home again, my home, for as long as I choose to live in it. They followed meekly, still processing the magnitude of what had happened. Not just their failed scheme, but the revelation of their mother's unexpected strength and resilience. As I filled the kettle, I caught sight of my reflection in the window above the sink. The woman staring back at me wasn't the compliant, agreeable mother I'd been for so long, nor was she the angry, vengeful woman who had hidden in the guest house documenting her children's betrayal. She was someone new, or perhaps someone very old, someone who had always been there beneath the surface. Strong, clear-eyed, uncompromising, yet capable of compassion. I smiled at my reflection, realizing that in my children's attempt to discard me, I had rediscovered myself. Later that evening, after Derek and Vanessa had left, subdued, remorseful, laden with promises to make amends, I called Lawrence to update him on the outcome. So, you're not pressing charges, he summarized when I'd finished my account. No, they're still my children, despite everything. But they won't be handling my finances again, and they certainly won't be making decisions about my care or my home. And Sunset Pines? I laughed. I've already called to terminate my contract, but I did ask if they could arrange for Marilyn, Gloria, and Judith to come for lunch next week. Those women were true friends when I needed them most. You're a better person than I am, Eleanor, Lawrence said, admiration in his voice. I might not have been so forgiving. It's not about forgiveness. Not yet. That will take time. It's about choosing what kind of person I want to be, what kind of life I want to lead in the years I have left. After saying goodbye to Lawrence, I wandered through my house, making mental notes of what needed to be restored, what had been lost forever, what could be reimagined in new ways. My home felt different now, not just because of the physical changes my children had made, but because I had changed. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, moving slowly, but with purpose. The generic bedding and sterile decor would have to go. I wanted my quilt back, the one I'd made from scraps of the children's old clothing. I wanted my books on the nightstand, my reading lamp positioned just so. My photos returned to their rightful places. But as I stood in the doorway, surveying the space that had been mine for 4 decades, I realized something unexpected. Beneath the anger and pain of betrayal, beneath the righteous satisfaction of exposing my children's scheme, there was something else, a curious sense of liberation. For years, I had defined myself primarily as a mother, as the keeper of this house, as the maintainer of family traditions and memories. My children's attempt to erase me had forced me to rediscover who I was beyond those roles, a woman with strength, resources, ingenuity, and fierce determination. A woman who could fight back, who could outmaneuver those who sought to discard. Her, who could extend mercy from a position of power rather than weakness. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my hand over the unfamiliar comforter. Tomorrow I would begin the work of reclaiming my space, of bringing back the tangible reminders of my life. But tonight, I would simply rest in the knowledge that I had survived the ultimate betrayal and emerged stronger for it. My children had tried to sell my house out from under me, but in doing so, they had inadvertently given me a priceless gift. The rediscovery of my own worth, independent of what I had given them or what they thought of me. As I prepared for bed in my own home, I thought of Marilyn, Gloria, and Judith back at Sunset Pines. Tomorrow I would call them again, not just to thank them for their help, but to discuss how I might help them reclaim their own power, their own voices. If my story could inspire them to stand up for themselves, perhaps some good could come from this painful chapter. Outside my window, the oak trees that had screened the guest house from view rustled in the evening breeze. They had been my unknowing accomplices, hiding me as I gathered evidence of my children's betrayal. Now they stood as silent witnesses to my homecoming. I drifted off to sleep in my own bed, in my own house, secure in the knowledge that I had faced the worst kind of betrayal and survived. More than survived, triumphed. My children had missed one crucial detail in their scheme. They had underestimated their mother. It was a mistake they would never make again. The first week back in my own home felt like an extended exhale after holding my breath for too long. Each morning, I woke in my bedroom, now restored with my own furnishings, and spent a moment simply appreciating the familiar ceiling, the way the light filtered through my curtains, the sounds of my neighborhood coming to life outside. My confrontation with Derek and Vanessa had left them shaken. True to their word, they'd spent the weekend helping me retrieve my belongings from storage, reinstalling the furniture they'd removed, and attempting to restore the house to its previous state. But some things couldn't be undone. The garden would take seasons to recover. Many of my personal items had been discarded beyond recovery, and the trust between us had been shattered in ways I wasn't sure could ever be fully repaired. On Monday morning, a week after the failed closing, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Marilyn, Gloria, and Judith standing on my porch, wide grins on their faces. "Told you we'd find it," Gloria announced triumphantly. "Nice digs, Eleanor," I laughed, ushering them inside. "How on earth did you get here? Did you escape from Sunset Pines?" "Better," Marilyn replied, winking. "We got day passes, signed ourselves out for a cultural excursion. And technically, visiting a historic Victorian home could be considered cultural." Judith looked around with wide eyes. "It's just as lovely as you described. I can see why you fought so hard to keep it." I gave them the grand tour, culminating in the sunroom where I'd set up a proper tea with my grandmother's china, rescued from the boxes Vanessa had marked for donation. As we settled with our cups, Marilyn leaned forward. "So, what happened after you confronted them? We're dying to know the details." I sipped my tea, considering how to explain the complicated emotions of that day. They were shocked, of course, remorseful, or at least they appeared to be. I decided not to press charges. Gloria snorted. "Saint Eleanor, I'd have thrown the book at them." "I considered it," I admitted. "But in the end, I realized that legal punishment wouldn't give me what I really wanted." "Which was?" Judith asked, softly, understanding, acknowledgement, a chance to rebuild something healthier. I set down my cup. "Don't misunderstand. I'm not excusing what they did. But they're still my children, and I didn't raise them to be the kind of people who would do this." Marilyn nodded thoughtfully. "So where do things stand now?" "We've established new boundaries. They know I'm staying in my home. The trust protecting the house for my future grandchildren remains in place, and I've revoked their power of attorney. Lawrence helped me designate him as my legal representative instead." "And they just accepted all that?" Gloria asked skeptically. "They didn't have much choice," I replied with a small smile. "But yes, they've been appropriately contrite. Derek's been by every day to help restore the garden. Vanessa called this morning to ask if I wanted to have lunch this weekend." Judith sighed wistfully. I wish my stepdaughter would show even a fraction of that remorse. The conversation shifted then, from my situation to theirs. Each of them had a story to tell, of children or stepchildren who had taken advantage, who had discarded them when they were no longer convenient, who had prioritized inheritance over relationship. "The worst part," Marilyn said as she accepted a refill of tea, "is feeling so powerless. I signed those papers. I trusted my son. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. Gloria nodded vigorously. Exactly. And once you're in a place like Sunset Pines, it's like you've been neatly filed away. Out of sight, out of mind, just waiting to die so they can collect whatever's left. I studied my three friends, seeing the resignation in their postures, the acceptance of defeat in their eyes. I recognized it because I had nearly succumbed to it myself. That quiet surrender to the narrative that older women were disposable, that our needs and wishes were secondary to everyone else's convenience. It doesn't have to be that way, I said suddenly, setting down my cup with more force than I'd intended. What happened to me? Discovering the trust, exposing my children's scheme. That was luck. But what came after wasn't luck at all. It was choice. I chose to fight back. I chose to reclaim my life. Marilyn raised an eyebrow. Not all of us have secret trust documents up our sleeves, Eleanor. No, but all of us have more power than we've been led to believe. I leaned forward, surprising myself with the intensity of my conviction. Judith, you said your stepdaughter took your condo and promised to invest the money for you. Have you ever asked for an accounting of those investments? Judith blinked. Well, no. She always changes the subject when I bring it up. And Gloria, you sold your house voluntarily, but you hate Sunset Pines. Have you looked into other living arrangements, apartments, retirement communities with more independence? Gloria shrugged. Where would I even start? And who would help me move? I would, I said firmly. And Lawrence would. And I bet there are resources we haven't even considered. Marilyn looked at me with narrowed eyes. What exactly are you suggesting, Eleanor? I smiled, a plan beginning to form. I'm suggesting that the four of us stop accepting the roles we've been assigned. I'm suggesting we take back control of our lives, together. By the time they left that afternoon, we had the beginnings of a strategy. Lawrence would meet with Judith next week to review her financial situation and potentially pursue legal action against her stepdaughter for financial exploitation. Gloria would start researching alternative living options, with my help. And Marilyn would finally contact the elder law attorney she'd been considering to review her rights regarding the house her son had sold. As I waved goodbye from my front porch, watching them climb into the Sunset Pines van for the return trip, I felt a surge of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. Their visit had crystallized something for me. The realization that my own victory would mean little if it remained mine alone. That evening, Derek stopped by as he had each night since our confrontation. He'd been working on restoring the garden, replacing the rose bushes he'd torn out, repairing the bird bath he'd removed. I watched from the kitchen window as he knelt in the dirt, carefully planting a young lilac sapling where the old tree had stood. When he came inside, his hands were dirty, but his expression was earnest. It won't be the same right away, he admitted. The new roses will take time to establish, but the nursery said this particular variety is hardy. They should flourish with proper care. I handed him a glass of iced tea. Thank you. I appreciate the effort. He accepted the glass but didn't drink, instead staring down at it as if it might contain answers. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you know? About the sale, I mean. About what Vanessa and I were planning. His eyes met mine, confusion evident. You were at Sunset Pines, and then suddenly you weren't. You knew everything. I considered how much to tell him. The full story of my surveillance operation felt like more than he deserved to know. My own small victory, my private triumph. But perhaps transparency was the first step toward rebuilding trust. I never left Sunset Pines officially, I explained. I escaped the day after you left me there. I've been living in the guest house ever since, watching everything you and Vanessa did. Derek's eyes widened. You mean you saw everything, I confirmed. The cleaners, the staging, the open house. I watched you sort through my belongings, deciding what was worth keeping and what could be discarded. I saw you throw away photo albums and keepsakes like they meant nothing. He blanched, setting down his untouched tea. God, Mom, I don't even know what to say. You don't need to say anything. Your actions spoke clearly enough. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd had since childhood when he was deeply uncomfortable. I keep trying to understand how we got here. How Vanessa and I convinced ourselves this was okay. It wasn't a sudden decision, you know. It built up over time. I sat down at the kitchen table, motioning for him to join me. Tell me. Derek sank into the chair across from me. It started after Dad left. You were so capable. You handled everything, the house, our education, your job. You never seemed to need help. When Vanessa and I would offer, you'd wave us off, insist you had everything under control. I frowned, thinking back to those difficult years after Frank's departure. Had I really been so dismissive of their offers of help? I'd been so determined to prove I could manage alone, to never show weakness. As we got older, Derek continued, we started worrying about practical things. The house is valuable, but the upkeep is expensive. Your retirement savings aren't as substantial as they could be because you spent so much on our education. And then there was the accident last winter. He was referring to my fall on the icy front steps, which had resulted in a sprained wrist but could have been much worse. We started talking about solutions, he said, staring at his hands. At first, it was just about convincing you to consider downsizing. Then Vanessa toured Sunset Pines for a story she was writing about retirement options, and she thought it seemed perfect. Perfect for whom? I asked quietly. Derek had the grace to look ashamed. That's where we went wrong, isn't it? We stopped thinking about what you would want and focused on what seemed most practical to us. He hesitated. And yes, the financial aspect became tempting. The house has appreciated so much, and we both had plans for that money. Your condo in Miami, I said. Vanessa's kitchen renovation. He nodded miserably. We told ourselves it made sense. Why should you struggle to maintain a big house when you could be comfortable in a nice facility, with the proceeds from the sale securing your future care? But the truth is, we wanted that money now, not later. We got greedy. His honesty was unexpected and, I had to admit, somewhat disarming. It was easier to be righteously angry at children who remained defiant than at a son who sat before me, openly acknowledging his failings. The forged power of attorney, I prompted. Whose idea was that? Derek winced. Vanessa's. But I went along with it. We convinced ourselves it was just expediting something you would agree to eventually. Once you saw how nice Sunset Pines was, how much easier your life would be there. I shook my head, still struggling to reconcile the son I thought I knew with the man who had participated in this deception. And if I hadn't discovered the truth? If the sale had gone through? We would have told you afterward, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. We had a story prepared about how the market was perfect for selling, how we'd found you a wonderful place to live, how everything was taken care of. And you believe I would have accepted that? That I would have thanked you for selling my home, without my knowledge or consent? He looked down again. I don't know. Maybe if we presented it as a done deal, or maybe we were kidding ourselves. He met my eyes again. Mom, I know sorry isn't enough. I know we violated your trust in the worst possible way. I just want to understand what happens now. Where do we go from here? It was the question I'd been asking myself since the confrontation. Where did we go from here? How could we rebuild what had been so thoroughly destroyed? I don't know exactly, I answered honestly. But I do know it starts with truth, complete transparency. No more decisions about my life without my full knowledge and consent. Absolutely, he agreed quickly. And it will take time, I continued. Trust isn't repaired overnight. There will be moments when I remember what you did, when I look at you and wonder if you're being honest with me. You'll need to accept that and not take it personally." Derek nodded soberly. "That's fair. More than fair." We talked for another hour, covering ground we hadn't touched in years. He spoke about the pressure he felt at work, about his relationship troubles, about the persistent feeling that he wasn't measuring up to some invisible standard. I shared my fears about aging, about becoming dependent, about losing my identity as I grew older. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was perhaps the beginning of understanding. After Derek left, I called Vanessa. Our conversations since the confrontation had been stilted, formal, lacking the warmth we'd once shared. But tonight, inspired by the breakthrough with Derek, I was determined to push past the awkwardness. "Mom?" she answered, sounding surprised by my evening call. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I assured her. "I just had a good talk with your brother, and it made me realize we haven't really talked, not honestly, in a very long time." There was a moment of silence, then a small, shaky breath. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that conversation yet, Mom. I'm still processing everything." I was taken aback. I'd expected resistance, perhaps, but not this direct acknowledgement of her own unreadiness. "I understand, but when you are ready, I'm here." "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm sorry for all of it. I just need some time." After we hung up, I sat on the porch swing, watching the evening shadows lengthen across my newly restored garden. Derek's contrition seemed genuine. Vanessa's reluctance to engage felt real as well. I found myself believing, for the first time, since discovering their betrayal, that we might eventually find our way back to something resembling family. But even as that hopeful thought took shape, another realization followed close behind. I couldn't wait for their healing, their understanding, their growth. I had my own life to live, my own path to forge. The next morning, I called Lawrence. "I need your help with something," I told him after exchanging pleasantries. "It's about Sunset Pines, or rather about the people still living there." I explained my conversations with Marilyn, Gloria, and Judith, their situations, and my growing conviction that something needed to be done. Not just for them, but for others like them. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Lawrence asked cautiously. "I'm not entirely sure yet," I admitted. "But it starts with information. Rights, resources, options. Most of these people don't even know what's possible, what they're entitled to. An educational initiative, then? Workshops, perhaps?" "That's a start," I agreed. "But I'm thinking of something more comprehensive. A network of support, legal, practical, emotional. Something to counterbalance the pressure from family members who may not have their best interests at heart." Lawrence was quiet for a moment, then chuckled. "Eleanor Harris, are you planning to start a revolution in elder care?" I smiled, warming to the idea. "Perhaps I am, a small one at least." Over the next few days, the concept took shape. Lawrence connected me with colleagues specializing in elder law and advocacy. I reached out to community organizations already working with seniors. I began compiling resources, researching models that had worked in other communities. By the weekend, when Vanessa finally agreed to meet me for lunch, I had a folder full of notes and a growing sense of purpose that went beyond my own situation. We met at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory where neither of us would feel at a disadvantage. Vanessa arrived looking tired, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed around the edges. "You look well, Mom," she said after we'd ordered. "Being back home agrees with you." "It does," I confirmed. "Though I've been quite busy, actually." Her eyebrows rose. "Oh? With what?" I told her about my budding project, the idea of creating a network of support for seniors facing pressures from family, from institutions, from a society that often treated the elderly as problems to be managed rather than people to be respected. As I spoke, Vanessa's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine engagement. "That's actually really important work," she said when I'd finished. "In my reporting, I've seen how vulnerable seniors can be, especially when it comes to financial decisions." "Precisely," I said, studying her carefully. "And yet you were willing to exploit that vulnerability when it came to your own mother." She flinched but didn't deny it. "Yes, I was." She twisted her napkin in her hands. "I've been trying to understand why. How I could do something so contrary to my values, my ethics as a journalist." "Have you found an answer?" She sighed. "Several, none of them flattering. Greed, certainly. Rationalization, telling myself it was for your own good. But underneath all that, I think there was fear. Fear of what? Of loss. Of change." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine directly for the first time. "Of watching you decline. Of having to confront your mortality and, by extension, my own." It was a more introspective response than I'd expected, revealing a depth of self-examination. That surprised me. "The irony," she continued, "is that in trying to control the situation, to neatly package you away where your aging wouldn't disrupt our lives, Derek and I nearly destroyed our relationship with you entirely. We almost lost you in our desperate attempt to avoid losing you." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Yet here we are." Vanessa squeezed my fingers. "Here we are," she echoed. Then, hesitantly, "I'd like to help, if you'd let me. With your project, I mean. I have contacts through the paper, access to research, a platform to share information." I considered her offer, balancing my lingering hurt against the potential value of her skills. "I'd like that," I decided, "but with one condition." "Name it." "You need to meet Marilyn, Gloria, and Judith. Hear their stories firsthand. Understand what's at stake." She nodded solemnly. "I'd be honored to meet them." As we finished our lunch, a tentative peace settling between us, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey of the past month. What had begun as a desperate act of self-preservation, escaping Sunset Pines, spying on my children, plotting, my counterattack, had evolved into something more complex, more nuanced, more hopeful than mere revenge. I had reclaimed my home, yes, but I had also discovered a new purpose, one that extended beyond my own four walls to encompass others who found themselves in similar situations. And perhaps most unexpectedly, I had begun the delicate process of rebuilding relationships I had once thought irreparably damaged. Walking home from the cafe, I felt the warm September sun on my face and thought about the seasons of life, how we navigate loss and renewal, how we adapt to changing circumstances, how we find meaning even in our most difficult experiences. My children had tried to sell my house to please themselves, disguising their greed as concern for my welfare. They had missed the crucial detail of the trust protecting my home. But the truly crucial detail, I now realized, was something far more fundamental. My own resilience, my unwillingness to be discarded, my determination to define the final chapters of my life on my own terms. As I turned onto my street, I saw Lawrence's car parked in front of my house. He was early for our meeting about the fledgling elder advocacy project, but I didn't mind. There was so much to discuss, so many possibilities to explore. The future stretched before me, not as a diminishment or a narrowing of options, but as an open field of potential, for growth, for purpose, for connection. I climbed my front steps, with a light heart, ready to embrace whatever came next. My children had tried to write my ending. Instead, they had inadvertently given me the opportunity to begin a new chapter, one entirely of my own making. Autumn arrived in earnest, painting my neighborhood in shades of amber and gold. 3 weeks had passed since my confrontation with Vanessa and Derek, and each day brought small steps toward a new normal. As the leaves changed outside my window, I found myself changing too, growing more confident in my vision for the future, more comfortable in my reclaimed independence. Lawrence and I sat at my dining room table, which was now covered with papers, brochures, and legal documents. What had begun as a vague idea had rapidly evolved into a concrete plan. The Golden Advocates Network, we were calling it, a multifaceted support system for seniors facing challenges with family, finances, and housing. The Community Center has agreed to donate space for our first workshop, Lawrence said, reviewing his notes. And I've confirmed 3 speakers, a geriatric social worker, a financial advisor specializing in retirement planning, and Judge Martinez, who's seen countless elder exploitation cases in her courtroom. I nodded, making notes in the leather-bound planner I'd purchased specifically for this project. Excellent. And what about publicity? We need to make sure the information reaches the people who need it most. That's where Vanessa's help has been invaluable, Lawrence admitted, a hint of surprise in his voice. He'd been skeptical when I first mentioned involving my daughter, given her role in the scheme against me. Her contacts at the newspaper arranged for a feature in this Sunday's lifestyle section, and she's secured spots on 2 local radio programs next week. A small smile touched my lips. Vanessa had thrown herself into this project with unexpected fervor. Whether motivated by genuine commitment or lingering guilt, her efforts were making a real difference. She'd even conducted in-depth interviews with Marilyn, Gloria, and Judith, treating their stories with the sensitivity and respect of a seasoned journalist covering an important social issue. And the legal clinic? I asked, turning to the next item on our agenda. Lawrence adjusted his glasses. We have 5 attorneys signed up to provide pro bono consultations, including myself. Each has committed to taking on at least 1 case free of charge if necessary. I leaned back in my chair, momentarily overwhelmed by how quickly our initiative was taking shape. When I'd first mentioned the idea to Lawrence, I'd imagined something small, perhaps a monthly support group or an informational pamphlet. Instead, we were building a comprehensive network of services, resources, and advocacy. What is it? Lawrence asked, noticing my expression. I'm just amazed, I admitted. A month ago, I was sitting in Sunset Pines, feeling powerless and betrayed. Now look at us. Lawrence's eyes crinkled at the corners. You've always been a force of nature, Eleanor. Your children simply made the mistake of forgetting that. Our planning session was interrupted by the doorbell. Lawrence glanced at his watch. That must be Derek. He mentioned he'd be stopping by with the printed flyers. Indeed, Derek stood on my porch holding a box of glossy brochures. Hot off the press, he announced, setting them on the hall table. The design team at my office did them as a favor. What do you think? I examined one of the flyers, admiring the clean layout and professional design. The Golden Advocates Network was emblazoned across the top in elegant font, followed by the tagline, Empowering Seniors, Protecting Rights, Building Community. They're perfect, I said, genuinely impressed. Thank you, Derek. He shrugged, but I could see he was pleased by my approval. Least I could do. Oh, and I've set up the website. It's basic for now, but it has all the essential information and contact forms. This, too, was unexpected. Derek volunteering his professional skills to support the project. Like Vanessa, he seemed determined to make amends through actions rather than just words. Lawrence excused himself shortly after, taking half the flyers to distribute among his colleagues and contacts. Derek lingered, eyeing the papers spread across the dining table. Need any help organizing all this? He offered. I'm pretty good at systems. I hesitated only briefly before nodding. Actually, yes. I could use a hand categorizing these resources by type of service. We worked together for the next hour, side by side in companionable silence. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was something. a bridge being carefully reconstructed between us, one small task at a time. As we finished, Derek cleared his throat. "Mom, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. I'm not going ahead with the Miami condo." I looked up surprised. "But you've wanted a place there for years." He shuffled the papers in front of him, avoiding my eyes. "It doesn't feel right. Not after everything that happened. I've decided to use that money differently." "How so?" "I'm investing in a small property here in town, a duplex. The idea is—" He paused, seeming uncertain whether to continue. "Go on," I encouraged. "Well, I'd live in one half, and the other half would be set up for you, if you ever decide you don't want to manage this big house alone. Completely separate entrances, your own space, but close enough that I could help with maintenance or emergencies." He hurried to add, "No pressure. It's just an option. For the future." I studied my son's face, searching for hidden agendas but finding only genuine concern. "That's thoughtful, Derek. But what changed your mind about Miami?" He was quiet for a moment. "When I thought we were going to sell this house, it was like, I don't know, a transaction. Business. But watching you fight for it, seeing how much it means to you to be in your own space, with your own things, your own history around you, it made me realize what really matters." He met my eyes. "I don't want a vacation property thousands of miles away. I want to be close to my family. To you." The words hung between us, weighted with meaning beyond their simple content. This wasn't just about housing arrangements. It was about priorities, values, connection. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "I'm not ready to leave this house. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But knowing the option exists, that you're thinking of me in that way, it means something." He nodded, understanding both what I said and what I left unspoken, that trust was returning gradually, that his actions were being noted, that healing was possible even if not immediate. After Derek left, I returned to the dining room, looking at the neatly organized piles of information. Each represented a strand in the safety net we were constructing: legal, resources, financial advice, housing options, healthcare advocacy, social services. Together, they formed a powerful counter-narrative to the one many seniors faced: that they were burdens, that their needs were inconvenient, that their lives mattered less as they aged. My phone chirped with an incoming text from Gloria. "Judith? Got her condo money back. Lawyer you recommended threatened lawsuit. Stepdaughter folded like cheap lawn chair. Celebration dinner tomorrow?" I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. These small victories fueled our collective determination. Judith's success would inspire Marilyn to pursue her case more aggressively, and that in turn would give others courage to advocate for themselves. The following morning, I drove to Sunset Pines for a prearranged meeting with the facility director, Mrs. Powell. She greeted me warmly in her office, seeming genuinely pleased to see me looking well. "Mrs. Harris, you're looking wonderful. Being back in your own home clearly agrees with you." "It does," I agreed, settling into the chair across from her desk. "But I'm not here about me. I want to talk to you about your residents, specifically about their rights and autonomy." Mrs. Powell's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "We take resident rights very seriously at Sunset Pines." "I'm sure you do," I said diplomatically. "But I'm concerned about a pattern I observed during my brief stay here. Many residents seem unaware of their options, their legal rights, even the terms of their own contracts." "That's a serious allegation," Mrs. Powell replied, her tone cooling further. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. "It's not an allegation, it's an observation, and I'm not here to criticize your facility specifically. I believe this is a systemic issue across elder care." I explained the Golden Advocates Network, our mission, and our upcoming workshops. To my surprise, Mrs. Powell's expression gradually softened as I spoke. "You know," she said when I'd finished, "I've been in senior care administration for 20 years. I've seen countless families make decisions without fully involving their elderly relatives, sometimes with the best intentions, sometimes—" She trailed off, not needing to complete the thought. "Would you be willing to partner with us?" I asked. "Allow us to offer our educational workshops here at Sunset Pines? Perhaps even integrate some of our resources into your orientation for new residents." Mrs. Powell considered the proposal. "I'd need to review your materials first and get approval from the corporate office. But personally, I think it's an excellent idea. Many of our residents could benefit from more information and support." We spent the next hour discussing logistics, potential resistance from family members, and how to frame the initiative as empowering rather than adversarial. By the time I left, we had a tentative agreement in place. Pending corporate approval, Sunset Pines would become the first senior living facility to formally partner with the Golden Advocates Network. As I walked through the facility's common areas on my way out, I saw familiar faces, residents I'd briefly known during my stay. Some greeted me with recognition, others simply offered the polite acknowledgement of strangers passing. But I viewed them all differently now, not as fellow inmates in an institution, but as individuals with stories, rights, and unfinished lives. Marilyn was waiting for me in the lobby, ready for our scheduled meeting about her own legal situation. "How'd it go with the warden?" she asked, half joking. "Better than expected," I replied, briefly explaining Mrs. Powell's tentative support. Marilyn looked skeptical. "Corporate will never go for it. Bad for business when the residents start demanding their rights." "Perhaps, but even if they decline, we've planted a seed." I checked my watch. "We should get going. Lawrence is expecting us at 11. We drove to Lawrence's office, where he was prepared to discuss Marilyn's options for challenging her son's sale of her house. Unlike Judith's relatively straightforward case, Marilyn's situation was more complex. She had signed the transfer papers, albeit under what we believed constituted undue influence. "The good news," Lawrence explained after reviewing the documents, "is that the sale occurred less than a year ago. That puts us within the statute of limitations for certain types of claims." Marilyn nodded, twisting the strap of her purse nervously. "And the bad news?" "The bad news is that you did sign the papers. And your son was already on the deed as co-owner, which complicates matters." Lawrence tapped his pen thoughtfully against his legal pad. "However, there are several approaches we could take. First, we could argue diminished capacity at the time of signing—" "I wasn't mentally impaired," Marilyn interrupted sharply. "Heartbroken, yes. Pressured, definitely, but not incompetent." Lawrence nodded, respecting her correction. "In that case, we might pursue an undue influence claim. Your son was in a position of trust, and he used that relationship to pressure you into a transaction that primarily benefited him while harming you." The discussion continued, with Lawrence outlining potential strategies, risks, and timelines. Throughout, I was struck by the transformation in Marilyn. The resigned, bitter woman I'd met at Sunset Pines was gone, replaced by someone alert, engaged, and determined to fight for justice. After the meeting, as we walked to my car, Marilyn squeezed my arm. "I never would have done this without you, Eleanor. I'd accepted that this was just how things were. Children taking advantage, parents getting discarded. You showed me it doesn't have to be that way." Her words stayed with me throughout the day, resonating as I attended to other tasks, reviewing the final workshop agenda, coordinating with Vanessa about media coverage, answering emails from seniors who had heard about our initiative and wanted information. By evening, I was pleasantly exhausted, the kind of tiredness that comes from meaningful work rather than despair. I had just settled onto my porch swing with a cup of tea when a familiar car pulled into my driveway. Vanessa stepped out, carrying what looked like a large portfolio. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," she said, climbing the porch steps. But I wanted to show you something in person. She hesitated, then added, If now's not a good time. It's fine, I assured her, gesturing to the swing beside me. What have... You got there? Vanessa sat, carefully opening the portfolio to reveal a mock-up of a magazine spread. The editor loved the interviews so much, he's expanded it from a single feature to a 3-part series. This is the layout for the first installment. I examined the pages with growing appreciation. The design was elegant and respectful, featuring dignified portraits of Marilyn, Gloria, and Judith alongside their stories. The headline read, The Silent Crisis, Elder Exploitation and the Fight for Dignity. Vanessa, this is excellent, I said, genuinely impressed. You've captured their experiences without sensationalizing or infantilizing them. She looked pleased but uncertain. You really think so? I was worried about getting the tone right. I wanted to highlight the injustice without portraying them as helpless victims. You've done exactly that. I turned to the section featuring Judith's story, noting how skillfully Vanessa had contextualized her stepdaughter's actions within broader societal patterns while still holding her accountable. There's a sidebar in the second installment about preventative measures, Vanessa explained, turning to another page, legal protections, communication strategies, resources, and the third part focuses on solutions, policy changes, community supports, and initiatives like the Golden Advocates Network. I looked up from the layouts to study my daughter's face. There was an intensity in her expression, a passionate engagement I hadn't seen in years, not since she was a young journalist working on her first major investigative piece. This isn't just about making amends to me, is it? I asked softly. You found a cause that genuinely matters to you. Vanessa was quiet for a moment, considering. I think it started as atonement, a way to try to balance out what Derek and I did to you. But the more I learned, the more I interviewed people and researched the issues, the more I realized how pervasive this problem is. She met my eyes directly. And yes, now it matters to me for its own sake. These stories need to be told. These injustices need to be addressed. I reached over and squeezed her hand, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Pride in her professional integrity, cautious optimism about our healing relationship, and a bittersweet awareness that sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most shameful mistakes. We spent the next hour on the porch, reviewing the layouts, discussing future coverage, and gradually moving to more personal topics. Her work, my adjustment to being home again, the changing dynamics between us. It wasn't the easy conversation we might have had before all this happened, but it felt honest, substantive, a solid foundation for whatever would come next. As Vanessa prepared to leave, she paused at the top of the porch steps. Mom, I've been thinking about something you said when you first confronted us, about how you'd failed as a mother because you'd raised children who could see you as nothing more than a financial asset. I nodded, remembering the raw pain of that moment. You didn't fail, she said firmly. Derek and I failed. We made choices. Terrible. Choices that reflected our own weaknesses, not your parenting. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that suddenly reminded me of her as a child. I just needed you to know that. Whatever else happens between us, don't carry that burden. It's not yours to bear. After she left, I remained on the porch, watching as twilight settled over my neighborhood. The air had turned cool, hinting at the winter to come, but I wasn't ready to go inside just yet. From this vantage point, I could see the results of Derek's gardening efforts, new rose bushes taking root, the lilac sapling standing straight despite its youth, freshly mulched beds, ready to sleep through the cold months ahead. The garden would not be the same as before. Some things, once destroyed, cannot be perfectly restored. But it would grow again. Differently, perhaps, but with its own beauty, its own resilience. Like my relationships with my children. Like my own life. reimagined after betrayal. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect weather for our first Golden Advocates workshop. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that projected both approachability and authority. Today marked the official launch of an initiative that had grown from personal pain to public purpose. Lawrence picked me up at 9, his car already loaded with materials for the presentation. "Nervous?" he asked as we drove toward the community center. "A little," I admitted, "but mostly excited." "This feels right, Lawrence. Like everything that happened was leading to this moment." He glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "Even the part where your children tried to sell your house out from under you?" I laughed, surprising both of us with the genuine mirth in the sound. "Especially that part. Without their betrayal, I might never have discovered this calling. I might have continued living a safe, comfortable life, never realizing how many others needed the voice and resources I could help provide." "Finding purpose in pain," Lawrence mused. "That's a rare gift, Eleanor." "Not so rare. People do it every day, transform their suffering into service, their personal tragedies into public good. I'm just following a well-established tradition. We arrived at the community center to find the parking lot already filling with cars. Inside, the large meeting room had been arranged with rows of chairs, a podium, and tables along the sides displaying brochures, sign-up sheets, and refreshments. Vanessa was already there, setting up recording equipment for her coverage. Derek stood nearby, helping an elderly man into a chair. Marilyn, Gloria, and Judith had arrived together and were seated in the front row, looking both nervous and proud. They had become the unofficial faces of our campaign, their stories serving as powerful examples of both vulnerability and strength. "There must be at least 50 people here already," Lawrence whispered, scanning the room. "And the workshop doesn't start for another 20 minutes. The success of this first event had implications beyond the immediate help it would provide. A strong turnout would strengthen our case for funding, for institutional partnerships, for expanded services. More importantly, it would signal to these seniors that they were not alone, not forgotten, not powerless. As I moved toward the front of the room, several people approached me, some I recognized from Sunset Pines, others unfamiliar but wearing expressions of hope and curiosity that tugged at my heart. Each had a story, a question, a concern. I listened to as many as time allowed, directing some toward specific resources, making notes to follow up with others later. At precisely 10 o'clock, Lawrence called the room to order. The crowd had swelled to nearly 70 people, with more still arriving. He welcomed everyone warmly, then introduced me as the founder of the Golden Advocates Network. As I stepped to the podium, I took a moment to survey the audience, the faces of men and women who had lived full lives, who had contributed to their families and communities, who deserved dignity and respect in their later years. In their expressions, I saw reflected my own journey from vulnerability to empowerment, from isolation to community. "Thank you for being here today," I began, my voice strong and clear. "Many of you know me as Eleanor Harris. Some of you may have heard pieces of my story, how my children placed me in assisted living without my full consent, how they attempted to sell my home, how I discovered their deception and fought back." A murmur ran through the crowd, acknowledging the story that had, thanks to Vanessa's reporting, become somewhat known in our community. "But that's not why we're here today," I continued. "We're here because my story is far from unique. It's happening in different forms to seniors across this country, children making decisions without consultation, assets being liquidated without consent, autonomy being stripped away under the guise of care." I glanced at Vanessa, who was recording at the back of the room, and at Derek, who stood quietly by the wall. They met my gaze steadily, accepting their role in this narrative without flinching away from it. The Golden Advocates Network was born from my personal experience, but it exists to serve all of you, Today marks the beginning of a community-wide effort to ensure that aging doesn't mean surrendering your rights, your voice, or your dignity. As I outlined our mission, our services, and our vision for the future, I felt a profound sense of alignment, as if all the disparate pieces of my life were finally falling into a meaningful pattern: the education that had made me a teacher, the resilience that had carried me through divorce and single parenthood, the betrayal that had awakened me to systemic injustice. All of it now converged in this new chapter, this unexpected calling. My children had moved me into Sunset Pines to please themselves, seeing me as an inconvenience to be managed, an asset to be liquidated. They had missed the crucial detail of the trust protecting my house. But the truly crucial detail they had missed was far more fundamental: that their mother, even at 68, was not finished growing, learning, contributing. That betrayal could become a catalyst. That endings often contain within them the seeds of new beginnings. As I concluded my remarks and introduced our first speaker, I caught sight of Lawrence in the back of the room. He gave me a subtle thumbs up, his eyes shining with pride and something else, a recognition, perhaps, of how far I'd come from that desperate phone call just weeks ago. I had fought to keep my house, and I had won. But in the process, I had gained something far more valuable than property. I had discovered a new purpose, a new community, and a new understanding of my own capacity for transformation. The details of my children's deception had revealed something crucial about them, but the aftermath had revealed something even more important about me: that I was still becoming, still evolving, still capable of turning life's harshest lessons into gifts not just for myself, but for others who needed exactly the light I had, found in my own darkness. 6 months passed, bringing winter's chill and then spring's renewal. The Golden Advocates Network had grown beyond my wildest expectations. What began as a single workshop had expanded into a comprehensive program with weekly support groups, monthly legal clinics, and a dedicated hotline for seniors facing potential exploitation. On a warm April morning, I sat in my garden, watching as the rose bushes Derek had planted burst into their first full bloom. The colors were vibrant against the weathered brick of my home: deep crimson, soft pink, buttery yellow, different from the varieties I'd cultivated for decades, but beautiful in their own right. Like this new chapter of my life, I reflected, unexpected, but flourishing nonetheless. My phone rang, displaying Marilyn's name on the screen. I answered with a smile, knowing she'd be calling with news about her case. "We won," she announced without preamble. "The judge ruled in my favor. My son has to return the proceeds from the house sale, minus what he's already paid for my care at Sunset Pines." "Marilyn, that's wonderful," I exclaimed, genuinely thrilled for my friend. Her legal battle had been long and challenging, with her son fighting the accusations every step of the way. "Lawrence was brilliant," she continued, her voice lighter than I'd ever heard it. "The judge said the evidence of undue influence was compelling and disturbing. My son's attorney tried to argue that I'd agreed to the arrangement, but Lawrence showed how he'd systematically isolated me from my support network before presenting the paperwork. The victory was significant not just for Marilyn personally, but for our cause. It established a precedent that could help other seniors in similar situations, creating a legal roadmap for challenging transactions made under pressure from family members. "What will you do now?" I asked, knowing she had been considering various options if her case succeeded. "That's the other reason I'm calling," she replied. "I've made an offer on a small house 3 blocks from you. I'm leaving Sunset Pines. Eleanor, I'm going to have my own home again." Tears sprang to my eyes, unbidden but welcome. This was why we had created the Golden Advocates Network, for moments precisely like this one, when a senior reclaimed their autonomy, their dignity, their rightful place in the world. "We'll be neighbors," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I couldn't be happier for you, Marilyn. After we hung up, I remained in the garden, reflecting on the transformations of the past half year. Gloria had also left Sunset Pines, moving into a vibrant senior apartment community that offered independence with optional support services. Judith had reconciled with her biological daughter, with whom she now lived comfortably. And dozens of others, people I'd met through our workshops, our support groups, our advocacy work, had found their voices, asserted their rights, rebuilt their lives. The sound of a car in the driveway pulled me from my thoughts. Vanessa appeared. Around the corner of the house, dressed casually in jeans and a light sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, a marked contrast to the polished, professional appearance she normally maintained. "Gardening day?" I asked, noting the canvas bag she carried. She nodded, setting the bag down and pulling out gardening gloves. "I thought I'd help with the herb garden you mentioned wanting to plant. Unless you've changed your mind?" "Not at all. I've been looking forward to it." These Saturday gardening sessions had become a ritual over the past few months, a neutral space where Vanessa and I could rebuild our relationship through shared activity rather than forced conversation. Sometimes we talked about important things: her, work, my advocacy, the still tender wounds of her betrayal. Other times we simply worked in companionable silence, allowing the rhythm of the garden to guide our healing. Today, as we prepared the soil for herbs, Vanessa seemed contemplative. "I had an interesting meeting yesterday," she finally said, carefully placing thyme seedlings in the freshly turned earth. "The executive editor wants me to expand the elder advocacy reporting into a regular beat." "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely pleased for her. The 3-part series she'd written had garnered significant attention, even winning a regional journalism award for public service reporting. It would mean less lifestyle coverage, more investigative work. She patted soil around a small rosemary plant. More time in the field, interviewing people, researching policy issues. "Sounds perfect for you. You've always had a knack for getting to the heart of complex issues." Vanessa looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I'd be covering stories like yours, Mom. Seniors fighting exploitation, navigating broken systems, advocating for change. I'd be telling stories that matter." I understood what she wasn't saying explicitly. That through this work, she was finding her own form of redemption, transforming her personal shame into professional purpose. Just as I had done with the Golden Advocates Network. "I'm proud of you," I said simply, "for finding this path, for using your talents to make a difference." She ducked her head, blinking rapidly, but not before I saw the tears in her eyes. We returned to our planting in silence, each of us processing the significance of this moment. Not forgiveness exactly, but something equally important: recognition of growth, of learning, of transformation. By afternoon, the herb garden was complete. Neat rows of basil, thyme, rosemary, and mint, with space left for the lavender that would arrive next week. Vanessa and I sat on the porch, drinking lemonade and admiring our work, when Derek's car pulled into the driveway. He emerged carrying a flat wooden box I didn't recognize. "Perfect timing," I called to him. "We just finished the herb garden." "It looks great," he replied, climbing the porch steps, "but I brought something that might make it even better." He set the box down on the small table between Vanessa and me, opening it to reveal a set of hand-carved garden markers, elegant wooden stakes with the names of herbs and flowers burned into them. "Derek," I breathed, lifting one to examine the detailed workmanship. "Did you make these?" He nodded, seeming both proud and slightly embarrassed. "Woodworking class. I've been going on Thursday nights." Vanessa picked up one of the markers, turning it in her hands. "Since when do you do woodworking?" Derek shrugged, taking a seat on the porch steps. "Since I realized I spend too much time staring at spreadsheets and not enough time creating something real." He glanced at me, Mom's garden project inspired me. Thought I'd try working with my hands for a change. The three of us sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the afternoon sun warming our faces. It struck me suddenly how much had changed. Not just in our external circumstances, but in our internal landscapes. My children seemed more grounded, more authentic than they had in years. The masks of professional success and material achievement had slipped away, revealing the people they were still becoming. "I have news," Derek said finally. "The duplex renovations are complete. I'm moving in next weekend." "That's wonderful," I replied sincerely. Though I had no plans to leave my beloved home anytime soon, knowing that the option existed, a space of my own, designed with accessibility in mind, near enough to family for support but separate enough for independence, provided a sense of security about the future. "And," he continued, "I've decided to rent the other half to Gloria temporarily, until Marilyn's house closes. She needed somewhere to stay after leaving Sunset Pines, and it seemed like a good solution." Vanessa and I exchanged surprised glances. This was unexpected, Derek offering his property to one of my Golden Advocate's allies, someone he barely knew except through my stories about her. "That's really thoughtful, Derek," I said carefully. He looked down, scuffing his shoe against the porch step. "It's the least I could do. After everything I learned from you and your friends about what seniors face, I just wanted to help somehow." In that moment, I saw something I'd been hoping for but hadn't quite believed possible yet. Genuine change. Not performance, not appeasement, but an authentic shift in perspective. Derek hadn't just returned my possessions or restored my garden. He had internalized the deeper lesson about dignity, about autonomy, about the value of every person regardless of age or circumstance. The three of us spent the remainder of the afternoon together, talking about the upcoming workshop series, Vanessa's new beat, Derek's woodworking projects. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my restored garden, I felt a sense of peace settle around me. Not the naive contentment of someone who has never known betrayal, but the hard-won serenity of someone who has walked through fire and emerged transformed. My children left as darkness fell, each with promises to return. Soon, Derek to install the garden markers, Vanessa to help plan the summer herb harvest. I watched their taillights disappear down the street, then turned back to my house, my home, silhouetted against the twilight sky. 6 months ago, I had discovered my children's plan to sell my house, to erase my existence for their financial gain. I had fought back, exposing their scheme, reclaiming my property, reasserting my right to determine my own future. But what began as a battle for my home had evolved into something far more significant, a movement that was helping others. Purpose that filled my days with meaning, a healing that extended beyond my own heart to touch my fractured family. Inside, I moved through rooms that once again reflected my life, my history, my taste. Photos had been returned to mantels, books, to shelves, memories to their rightful places of honor. Yet the house wasn't exactly as it had been before. New elements had been integrated. The herb garden outside, Derek's handcrafted pieces, artwork from Vanessa's travels. Even my furniture arrangement had changed, reflecting new priorities, new patterns of living, like the home that sheltered. My family had been broken and then rebuilt, not identical to what had existed before, but perhaps stronger in the repaired places, more beautiful for having acknowledged the damage and undertaken the painstaking work of restoration. I settled into my favorite chair by the fireplace, a cup of tea warming my hands. On the side table lay a stack of thank you notes from seniors who had attended our most recent workshop, each expressing gratitude for the information, the support, the hope they had received. Beside them sat Lawrence's latest update on policy, initiatives we were helping to advocate for. stronger protections against elder exploitation, improved oversight of power of attorney arrangements, greater transparency in senior living facility contracts. The work was far from finished. For every Marilyn who reclaimed her home, every Gloria who found a more suitable living arrangement, every Judith who reconciled with family, there were dozens more seniors facing isolation, pressure, manipulation, loss of autonomy. But we had created a model, a framework, a community of support that was making tangible differences in real lives. My phone chimed with an incoming text. I glanced at the screen to see a message from Lawrence. Just heard from Judge Martinez. She wants to speak at next month's workshop. Says your advocacy work is exactly what this community needs. I smiled, sending back a quick confirmation before setting the phone aside. From betrayal had come purpose. From loss had come community. From pain had come healing, not just for me but for others walking similar paths. My children had moved me into a nursing home to please themselves, then tried to sell my house out from under me. They had underestimated my resilience, my resourcefulness, my determination to maintain control of my own life. But in their failure, something unexpected had bloomed, a transformation that touched all our lives, rippling outward to affect countless others. The crucial detail they had missed wasn't just the legal trust protecting my house. It was the fundamental truth that we are never too old for reinvention, for purpose, for meaning. That our later years can be a time not of diminishment, but of expansion, of wisdom deepened, of compassion widened, of service extended. As I drifted toward sleep in my chair, warmed by the gentle spring air flowing through open windows, I felt profound gratitude, not despite the betrayal I had experienced, but strangely, impossibly, because of it. For in that darkest moment, when my children had tried to erase me, I had discovered instead my brightest rebirth. And in that paradox lay the most important lesson of all: that sometimes our greatest beginnings emerge from what we initially perceive as our most devastating endings. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.